Hello everybody! In this video I want to go over a few teamfight situations from the series between KT and T1 from week 2 of the 2021 LCK Spring Split. The things I look at in a teamfight are the position, movement and timing of both teams. I believe teamfights are often crucial moments that tend to swing games in either direction. So the way they're executed can be just as impactful as drafting decisions that seem to dominate the conversation around professional games. I have nothing against those discussions, I just want to bring a different perspective that I personally find equally valuable. More specifically, in this video I want to go over the flanking position and why I think it's so useful and to a degree essential when setting up around objectives like the Dragon or Baron. First, let me define what I mean by a flanking position, since most people probably think of a very specific thing. Here is an example of positioning around Dragon. These would be your control players. This is your primary source of damage, most often a marksman type champion, and this would be the way most people would see the flank. This could be an Akali or Renekton as example champions. However, a flank doesn't have to be this deep unless you really want to engage despite controlling the area around the objective. Generally speaking, engaging fights is harder than dealing with engages, so when you have the position on the objective, a defensive posture can make things a lot easier for the players. If this is our position or structure of our team around the objective, this can also be defined as our flank, and this is where our secondary threat should be with our primary source of damage close to the control players. Basically, the structure around objectives can be summed up very simply. This is our center core, and these will be our wings or shoulders, but for the sake of not using different terminology, let's call them flanks. This means if our opponent tries to engage, our secondary threat will get access to their backline without needing to position aggressively. With that out of the way, let's jump into the game. This is game 1 of the series, and here you can see the team compositions. KT have decent control in their core with champions like Alistar and Orianna. Keep in mind, a control player can still do damage, they're just not the primary damage dealer of the composition. KT also have multiple threats in the face of the Samira and the Gangplank. Now the Orianna and Lilia can still pose a damage threat, but that is more dependent on the game state. Generally, they're more utility focused and again, usually not the primary source of damage. T1 have a very similar composition in terms of how they want to position for a teamfight. Renekton can sit on the flank with Jarvan and Galio controlling the center around the Vayne, while Syndra is also able to flex between controlling the center of the fight or positioning on the flank to create another angle. The way this early game played out, it felt like KT was making sure that the Gangplank had a good laning phase with multiple ganks in the top lane. They are also able to secure both heralds on the top side of the map. T1 responded by taking the first 2 dragons. At around 17 minutes in, we get our first team fight with the GOAT basically dead even. KT decide to contest the potential soul point, but end up losing the fight, tipping the game in favor of T1. Let's look at this position. Most of T1 came from the mid lane after dealing with the Herald spawn and are able to get position on the Dragon with Renekton sitting on that T flank we talked about. He does get revealed very briefly and KT are likely aware of his position. Orianna ends up moving into this area, clearing out wards and possibly trying to spot for Renekton, while Samira and Gangplank clump together as they try to put damage down. Alistar is doing a decent job at zoning, but Syndra finds the angle and gets a stun on the Samira. With Gangplank next to her, both get caught up in T1's engage as Galio ultimate comes in. Samira is able to flash out, but the Renekton comes in to finish the job. With that, Samira goes down, with the Orianna having very little impact this fight. Vayne now enters the fight with not much to worry about. A really good execution from T1 in my opinion, demonstrating the strength of the flank when it comes to following up on an engage. When trying to engage a fight, you should take into account your opponent's ability to move back and stretch the fight, be it through a flash or other abilities. If you just engage in a straight line, you run the risk of not having timely follow-up and being unable to kill the initial target, putting your engaged champion in the center of the fight taking damage. Now, how could have KT dealt with the situation a little bit better? First, they need to deal with the flank position. Even if they don't have perfect vision, they have to assume Renekton will look for a flank. Orianna is not the champion that can potentially zone away a Renekton. Gangplank should be the one doing that. He did get a lot of attention in the early game, so he's in a good spot to do that. Also, Gangplank's ultimate allows him to have impact in the center of the fight as well. Lydia should look to enter the pit to threaten the smite on the dragon, while Alistar keeps pressure on the center of the fight with Samira and Orianna behind him ready to follow up. Of course, play mechanics and skill are needed. The timing of who gets to engage and how it plays out in terms of ability usage will be the determining factor. However, whoever controls more space has a better chance at coming away with a win. By moving this way, KT can take away space and potentially force a mistake from T1. This is exactly what T1 did to them in the second game of the series. And it almost worked out. However, I think the issue for T1 in this fight was Udyr's immediate reaction to the engage. He collapsed onto the Renekton instead of focusing on the low health members right in front of him, thus potentially winning the backside of this fight while relying on his teammates to be able to deal with KT's engage, as the Kai'Sa does have the tools to do so. T1 also didn't effectively deal with this flank either. Another way to deal with flanks is to push through the center, which T1 did, but also rotate your primary damage dealer away from the flank and into that space you're opening up. However, the Kai'Sa ultimate put her backwards and stretched this fight even more. With KT still controlling a lot of space, T1's main focus was to keep the Kai'Sa alive, but that ends up giving up a couple of kills to KT at the back end of this fight, which allows them to get some map control afterwards as well. Setting up a secondary angle or a flank makes your opponent's approach a lot more difficult. I think that was a crucial mistake that probably contributed to T1 losing Game 3 of this series. In Game 3, T1 go for the Baron, but watch Renekton's movement. He goes into the pit for a single auto attack on the Baron and then moves in front to try and zone. Renekton does take a lot of damage while T1 are able to secure the Baron. However, they commit to this straight line fight, which KT are able to stretch out into the choke. Thanks to a very clutch Gnar play, they are able to pull out the win and secure a 2-1 overall victory. We are talking very thin margins here, but I believe the proper play is to put the Renekton on the side and have Galio zone and delay in the center. This gives Renekton access to the backline if KT decide to commit forward. This position makes the approach from KT a lot more difficult, as they would be aware that moving forward exposes them to the Renekton. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And if you want to see more breakdowns that focus on execution, consider subscribing, as I plan on doing more. I'm gonna end it on this. Thank you for watching and have a productive day.